My name is Luabalo. I'm from SILT, the Learning Technologies team there, and I will be covering test and quizzes today, getting you started on setting up your first quiz on Vula. Okay, welcome everyone. So today we'll be looking at the test and quizzes on Vula. The test and quiz tool basically allows us to create quiz like MCQ tests and fill in the missing words, quite a lot of question types. So today we'll just be going through that. So if you could go to your Vula site, mine is called this, and I'll just find the test and quizzes tool there. And I'll be presented with this window. As you can see here, you've got the create assessment option. This would allow you to enter your test title. So let's just call it quiz. Oops, spelling. And I'll just click the create button. Once I've clicked the create button, I'll be provided with this window. So I have to get started adding my questions in here. As you can see here, I've got a section on adding questions. I click on the drop-down menu, I can see a whole lot of question types that I can use. So for this exercise, we'll just be looking at adding multiple choice questions. So multiple choice questions, as we all know, would allow you to pose a question, and students would then choose the correct answer. So we get started. You can set the points there. You could even set it to 1, 10, 5. So for this example, we'll just use 1 point. Do you want to display the point to students? Well, yes, you could do that. Under the answer, do you want to have a single correct, multiple correct, or multiple correct, multiple selection? For this example, we'll just be focusing on the single correct, multiple correct, single correct answer. We're not going to be using any negative marking for this exercise. So the question text, this is where your question will go in. So if for example, my question is, what is the square root of 16? And once I've entered the questions here, I can then fit in my options down here. So I've got correct answer A, B, C, and D, depending on the number of options I want to show to the student. So I could say it's 8, that's the first option. I can say it's 6, or I can say it's 4, or I can say 7. If I want to add more fields or more options, I can just go right at the bottom after the last option, which is D, and I can then state there as to how many more options I would like to add. If I wanted to add an extra one, which is E, then I would just type in another option there. I still have to tell the system which one is the correct answer. So in this case, the correct answer is 4. So I would select correct answer there. I also have an optional feedback box there below there. So I can provide the student with feedback, but that is optional. So moving right along, I can also randomize the answers here. So why would you want to randomize your answers? So that if students are sitting next to each other, they don't copy from each other. They don't have the same answer. So if for one student, if it's A, for the other student, it should be D. So I would say randomize the answers. Required rationale, we'll skip that for now. We don't want to assign it to a part at the moment. We don't have parts created, and we won't be assigning it to a question pool. Right below here, you've got correct answer and incorrect answer. So this is also optional. So if correct answer, you give feedback. incorrect answer, you would also give feedback to the student.
Hello, Bolo. Could you explain why there's a correct and incorrect answer field here and after each question?
This would come in handy if you providing feedback, so you can provide feedback at a question level and also at an overall level. So in this case, this applies overall. So if you look here, so this is at a question level. So when you're providing feedback to the student, depending on which answer they choose here, it will still provide, you could set it to provide feedback at that level.
Perfect, thanks.
We'll look at this, we'll come back to this when we're working on the settings of this quiz. It will make more sense then. And when we're done setting up the first question, we'll click on the Save button. And it will then list the question there. You'll notice there, that's the question, what is the square root of 16? And the correct answer is 4. And you've got the red button selected there. And that's basically how you would set your first multiple choice question. We've set up our first question in the test and quiz, and that was an MCQ type question. So I'd like us to look at a different question type as part of our quiz. So we'll go back into the next section here, Add Question, and we'll select or click on the drop-down menu there. And let's say, for argument's sake, we want to create a short essay type question. So a short essay type question would be, as an academic or an educator, you would pose a question at the student, and the student would have to provide an essay type response to that question. So let's have a look at it. Right. So it's the essay type question, that's the type of question. Then you give it a point here. So let's just say it's 5 points. Display the point value. You want the student to see how much the question is worth? Yes, you can share that. Question text, this is where you'd enter your question. You'll also notice here on the top right hand side there's an option to show the rich text editor. When you click on it, what it does, it provides you with some formatting tools. In the first question we didn't have this, we didn't activate it, but it's a nice handy tool to have. So we type in our question there. Say your question could be, what measures should be put in place to counter the coronavirus spread? Right. So that's the question, and you could elaborate or ask the student to elaborate or give their view. Right. So that's our question, and if you need to make any formatting or add images, you do have those options here. So if you want to make a certain word bold, for instance, coronavirus, make it red, change that. So the formatting basically just allows you to edit the text and make it look better. Right, so we've set up our question, right? Do you want them to refer to a document? At the moment, we don't have a document to refer to, so we'll just have them enter their response below. We don't have a model answer, so we'll for now leave it out. But we'll come back to this as our next example, or later on, look at how you create model answers. Right. And the feedback is also optional here, so we don't need to provide feedback. And once we're done, we click on Save at the bottom. This will now take us back to the main menu, the main page, and this is now 2 questions created after as part of our quiz, an MCQ and a free text essay type question. You can also preview this to get a feel of how the students will see the quiz once it's created and published. So as you can see here on top, you've got options: add part, preview, print, setup, and publish. So at the moment we just want to preview it. So we can click on preview. It will take us here. This is how students will see, or this is how it will appear to students when they're about to take the test. and they can begin assessment. And the first question of the two would be that, and as a student I would choose the correct answer and click next, and it will take me to the second one. And the second one, I'll now have the essay type question. So the question would be shown right up there, and it's telling me that I'm currently on question 2 of 2, 5 points, and there. And I'll enter my response here. As you can see, there's also a word limitation there, so it's 32,000 words. As a student types their response, they can also use the text editor. When the text editor or formatting tool is switched on, you can see that it also provides the student with a word count. So you could guide the student and say, what measures should be put in place to counter the spread of coronavirus? Please provide your response with inside 500 words or within 500 words. And once they're done, they can save. They're just saving changes, and they can submit for grading. And that's basically it. So they would have submitted the test. So what I would like us to look at next is basically the settings. So the settings for test and quiz, that's where you'd be deciding or working out the dates, when would this test be released, to who it should be released to, and if you want to set up feedback and all kind of things. So I would like us to have a look at this. First part under settings would be the quiz title. So you can change the title here if you want to assign a different title. So we'll just keep it as quiz 1. It's optional to insert the description here. You can type in the description or you could leave it out. Okay. And you also have here the honor and pledge. Basically, just you could set this before the student starts taking the test. They could more of agree and say, for instance, that they won't be copying and they're not copying and so on. So I would just switch this on. If I have any additional attachments, I'll add them here. But for now, for this exercise, we're not going to have any additional attachments. We'll skip the metadata. The most important part when setting up the quiz is basically the availability and submission, grading and feedback, the layout and appearance. But I'll cover all 4 sections below here. So the availability and submission section, this is where you decide who gets to take this test and how long it's going to last, or how long will students be given to complete it. So the assessment is released to, where it says here, it says to the entire site. That means all the students in the course. If you wanted this assessment to be released to a certain group of students, then you would select the groups. In this case, we don't have any groups created, so we'll just leave it as entire site. Moving on, how many times should the students be allowed to take this test? Do you want it to be unlimited? By unlimited, it means they can take it as many times inside the opening queue date. For this exercise, we'll just restrict them to only taking the assessment once, which then takes us to the next part as to when is this available? When will this test open or quiz open? So I can set the dates here by clicking on the small calendar widget here, click, and I can then state when it should start. So I want it to start on the 17th March 2020, and at what time. So to determine the time, or to define the time down here, I can use the sliders. So the hour slider, if I say I want it to start at 1300, I can just move it to 13 there, and I can also tweak the minutes using the minute slider below there. And happy with that, then I'll click done to save these changes. when is this due? So I want this to close on Friday, the 20th. So I'll select Friday the 20th at what time? So I can then state there at 2000 hours. And there. Do I want my test to be timed? So by having a time test or quiz, I can set the time that the student is allowed to complete, or the student should complete this test within a number of minutes. So here I have an option where it says it's due and has a time limit off. So to enable the clock, the countdown, I would select it's due and has a time limit off. I'll select, is it in hours or is it in minutes? For argument's sake, let's say we're giving our students 30 minutes to complete this task. So we'll just define 30 minutes, scroll, there we go. So you'll see that it says 0 hours, 30 minutes. Right. Are we going to have late submissions? No, not after the due date. So we're not accepting any late submissions on this test. We'll select no. Do you want to auto-submit? Because this is a timed test, it's always advisable to auto-submit. Why? Because if the student runs out of time, their work is auto-saved and submitted on their behalf, so they do not lose the responses they've made while taking the test. So I'll enable this auto-submit, so this will then auto-submit once the student's time runs out. Email notification. Do I want to send an email? Do I want to receive an email whenever a submission is made? It's usually better not to set it to send email, so you leave it as no. Question scores, show them, point value. So do you want to show them during the assessment or hide them? It's optional. Remember, when we were setting up the questions, we said it should show the points for each question, so we might as well select it there.
Right, so given that a lot of our students are going to have some difficulty and it may be entirely new for them to do online quizzes, I am going to recommend that if this is the first time your students will be doing an online only quiz, that you allow them at least 2 submissions. Right, so 1 submission for big tests, but while you're starting out, 2 submissions just so that if someone logs on and submits by mistake, that they don't have their marks altered by a careless mistake by someone who hasn't used the platform before. Likewise, with some of these other things, you might want to consider accepting late submissions for another day or 2 after the test has passed, just for these students who may struggle with connectivity or who are in an area where they have to travel to a local town or something to go to an internet cafe. In your initial tests, just in this first period, it's probably better to be a little bit more lenient than you would have in a, say, normal academic environment. Play around with it, see what you feel like, maybe run a little demo test to start so your students have some experience working with the platform, and then later on in the year, if needs be, you can be a little bit harsher with your tests and quizzes. I'm going to hand back to Vula.
Right, thank you, Thomas. Then that takes us towards the end of the settings. The last one would be layout and layout and appearance. So the layout and appearance, basically you just define how students should go through the questions. So the navigation here is you've got linear and random. We always advise you to give students random access to question. What that means is it allows them to move back and forth and jump questions and so on. Whereas the linear access to question would restrict them. So once they've clicked next, they can't go back to the previous question. So to give them the freedom going through these questions, it's always better to leave it at random access to questions.